When the first tanks lumbered across the battlefields of World War I, German soldiers watched helplessly from their trenches. Their shots bounced off the approaching giants. The tanks were unstoppable. But whenever a new weapon appears in combat, it isn't long before another weapon arrives to counter the effect. Back and forth, this balance swings. As tanks add armor, anti-tank weapons gain a more lethal punch. Today, attack helicopters, jet fighters, and guided munitions join the arsenal of tank busters. There is no question that today the dominant weapon of land warfare is the main battle tank. Armed with a deadly accurate main gun and protected by top-secret composite armor, the tank is the spearhead that pierces an enemy's defenses. Racing across the battlefield at nearly 50 miles an hour, the M1A1 Abrams tank of the U.S. Army did what it was designed to do during the 1991 Persian Gulf War: seek and destroy enemy armor. Iraqi vehicles, armored personnel carriers, and battle tanks, including the Soviet-built T-72, known as the Lion of Babylon, were overwhelmed by the tank-killing power of the helicopters, attack planes, infantry, and tanks of the coalition forces. The tank round that took the turret off more Iraqi tanks was the Abrams 120mm armor-piercing penetrator rod. This 2-foot-long rod, held in place by sabots that fall away as the round clears the muzzle, is made of hardened, depleted uranium, known as the silver bullet. The rod doesn't explode, but punches a hole through the armor.
There is no known enemy vehicle that cannot be penetrated by the sabot round. One of the greatest strengths of the M1 tank is the stabilization system on the main gun and the ability to acquire targets with a great deal of accuracy and kill them. It is the premier anti-tank weapon in the world.
But the tank's dominance over the battlefield may be short-lived. With so many weapons aimed at knocking them out, their future is uncertain. After 75 years, the balance of tank versus tank killer may be shifting away from the once almighty land ships. The young soldiers who marched across Europe in 1914 expected to fight a war much the way their fathers or grandfathers might have fought. But these soldiers faced a new, deadlier enemy, the Industrial Revolution. They were confronted with weapons of unprecedented killing power. High-explosive artillery shells, rapid-fire machine guns cut down waves of infantry assaults. The specter of poison gas attacks paralyzed the battlefield. And the threat of aerial bombardment halted any hope of maneuver. Both sides of the Western Front looked desperately for something that could break the stranglehold that these weapons exerted on the battlefield. They found it in 1916.
Of all the countries in the world, it was the British who actually pushed forward the design of the tank. When the British first used tanks during the First World War, the Germans had no tanks, so there were no tank-via-tank battles. Its main object was to cross the trenches, sweep the ground with fire either side. The idea was for the tank to go through trenches, barbed wire, and then into the main enemy area, spraying the trenches with machine gun fire and punching a hole so the infantry on foot could follow. They were very slow creatures. They had a very small range of action. They were powered by petrol engines, and inside the tank, the conditions were terrible.
The noise of the engine, the noise of the guns, the concussions outside the tank, and the general, it's like being in a maelstrom of noise and racket and discomfort. It's terribly hot, and you're just tickle pink to get the damn thing back to where you can park it and get out of it. And but they were very effective because you could hear the bullets hit the sides and you felt invincible, and you could go right over the wire because it was powerful enough to tear the wire loose. But I'd heard the bullets hit them like rain hit the tin roof, but I did feel a great security in them. I knew the average bullet would have torn me to pieces, was going to hurt me. It just bounced off the armor of the tank.
The machine guns disappeared beneath the steel giants.
You could run right on up to it, just like your thumb in your nose out and go right up to it and shoot right into the aperture and clean them out. They couldn't do a thing about it.
When the tank first appeared on the battlefield, the German infantry were frightened. They had nothing to defend themselves against this tank. The Germans could not do anything at all.
The first tanks were built by riveting together sheets of quarter-inch thick steel plate. Although bullets couldn't penetrate the armor, fragments of lead from rounds striking near the joints ricocheted inside the tank and injured the crew. For added protection, the crews often wore steel face masks. Although German rifles couldn't stop the tanks, German artillery could.
So what they did first of all was to bring artillery forward. If a tank got hit with a 75mm shell, it could well penetrate the tank, it would hit the crew, the petrol would catch on fire and the tank would be burnt out. But obviously you couldn't deploy those guns everywhere.
Left with the reality of going up against tanks with only limited artillery support, the German infantry had little chance of silencing the guns of the tanks. They needed a portable weapon that could pierce the armor plates.
So the Germans did invent large caliber anti-tank rifles. They were like a rifle but much bigger, firing a much harder round, and the idea was to punch a hole through the tank.
But more than just punch a hole in the tank, these rounds could ignite fuel or ammunition and destroy the tank. These oversized rifles, the first anti-tank weapons, fired a 13mm solid steel bullet at a higher velocity than ordinary rifles firing lead bullets. Witnessing the success of British armor, the German High Command ordered production of their own tank, the A7V. Although heavily armed, the tank was difficult to maneuver and appeared too late to affect the outcome of the war that had brought such revolutionary change to the battlefield. The signing of the armistice on November 11, 1918, stopped the fighting and brought home the soldiers who had survived the carnage of no man's land. The world, said President Woodrow Wilson, was now safe for democracy. By spring, the Allied nations came together in Paris at the Palace of Versailles to dictate the terms of the peace treaty. With the enemy vanquished, leaders saw no use for their large navies and armies. The Infant American Tank Corps was disbanded by 1920, and what tanks remained were placed under the control of the infantry. With restricted funding, improvements in tank designs came slowly, the Army focused its efforts on the production of low-cost, thin-skinned scout tanks. By the late 1930s, a successful design emerged, the M3 Stuart light tank. Fast and agile, the Stuart bridged the gap between tanks armed only with machine guns and those armed with heavy cannon. However, the inch-and-a-half thick steel plate would not have protected the crew against the armor-piercing shells of its own 37mm gun. And it would certainly be inadequate protection against the 75mm guns that armed the tanks built by Germany. Designed in violation of the Treaty of Versailles, German tanks were sheathed with heavier, all-welded armor. On September 1st, 1939, with the invasion of Poland, the Nazi armored divisions proved to the world the power of their war machine. One by one, the Polish cities capitulated until only a month later, the last organized resistance ended. Now the German army turned its sights to the west. American industry began producing tanks in record numbers. A larger tank, the M3 medium tank, was more heavily armed than the Scout tanks, but it was still assembled by joining armor plates with bolts and rivets, and the near vertical hull plates made for easy targets.
The M3 was simply awful. It was called a bucket of death because it had been put together with bolts, welded bolts. And whenever it took a hit, why, those bolts would buzz around inside of the tank like bees. And you got as much damage from them as you did from the explosion of the shells.
The German armored juggernaut overran much of North Africa by 1942. Its superior armor and firepower, unchecked by inferior Allied equipment, dominated the battlefields. Army analysts, searching for the Panzer's weakness, brought captured German tanks to the Aberdeen Proving Ground in Maryland. A revolutionary new anti-tank weapon proved it could stop the German armor, the bazooka.
It's developed by an ordnance officer who comes up with a rocket launcher that's 2.36 inches in diameter. He uses metal out of fire extinguishers to make this tube, and he uses a high explosive anti-tank warhead in a rocket in this tube. And we take it to North Africa and use it against German tanks.
Once in combat, the shaped charge projectile proved itself to be a valuable weapon. When the tip strikes the armor and triggers the fuse, the cone shape focuses the detonation, turning the projectile into a molten plasma, which literally burns its way through nearly a foot of steel.
The bazooka was a man-portable system, and normally a two-man team had them. One man to fire the system, the other one acting as a loader. The effective range of the early type bazooka was really only several hundred meters. In peacetime, you claimed a success rate of perhaps 95%, but under real wartime conditions, the enemy is coming at you and firing at you. It needs a brave man to sit there and wait till that tank comes within 200 meters before you open fire.
Facing a formidable Soviet armored threat on the Eastern Front, the German army engineered its own version of the bazooka. Called the Panzer Schreck, this rocket launcher was particularly effective against the heavily armored Russian T-34. Soon they improved on the design by creating a projectile with a much larger shaped charge. With a bigger charge, the Panzerfaust could burn through even thicker armor. Once it breached the armor, the blast would incinerate the tank and its crew.
It was a much more powerful weapon than our bazooka, but it wasn't as long a range. Our problem was our bazooka, the shape charge was too small in diameter, but it did have a pretty good range. The German Panzerfaust had a larger shape charge and more effective now, but it had a shorter range, so you had to weigh one against the other. Another thing, the Panzerfaust could be handled by a single man, whereas a bazooka took a two-man team. We did use our bazookas against German tanks, and we knocked out some German tanks with them, but they weren't near as effective against German tanks as that Panzerfaust was against us. The German Panzerfaust was such a good weapon, we would usually capture a bunch of them, so there were plenty of them around. I'd say a lot of our infantry carried German Panzerfaust and used them.
When the Panzerfaust come in and the bazooka, you gave the infantryman something he'd never had, the ability to kill a tank. And that's something he still wants today.
By 1944, the Allies had moved away from the idea that the tank was primarily an infantry support weapon. The fast, maneuverable Sherman was well suited to offensive armored warfare, but compared with the most modern German designs, it was undergunned and often needed superior numbers to outmatch the opposition. The American Army entered the war with only nominal anti-tank weapons. Small artillery pieces like the 37mm cannon would do little harm against the thick hide of the German tanks.
The 37mm caliber was about the standard caliber of an anti-tank gun before the Second World War. That was quite adequate to take out most of the tanks that appeared on the battlefield then.
The American 37mm gun would penetrate about an inch and a half of armor, but it wouldn't go through the front of one of our tanks, nor would it penetrate the front of a German tank. They also had another model of the 37mm, which was mounted behind an armored shield on a 3/4-ton weapons carrier. They were good against half-tracks and personnel carriers and things like that. But here again, those guns were really not effective against German tanks.
Stopping the Blitzkrieg demanded a more potent solution. The first weapons dedicated to hunting enemy armor were simply M3 half-tracks fitted with high-velocity howitzers.
It became pretty obvious. You needed a large caliber artillery-type piece to knock out a tank, in particular something with fairly good velocity. They originally put a 75mm anti-tank gun mounted on a half-track, and that was all right, but it wasn't very high velocity, and the top of the half-track was completely exposed, so that didn't turn out to be too good, but they did use some of them in North Africa.
In their baptism of fire, the tank destroyers fared well against Rommel's armor. The Army recognized the need to equip anti-armor units with more powerful guns to defeat Nazi armor. The M10 was the first tank destroyer gun mounted on a modified tank chassis. The 3-inch gun was mounted in a thinly armored open turret. This saved weight and enhanced the tank's mobility.
It had a bigger gun and therefore could fire a more powerful round, but it was a tank destroyer. It would really go out and try and hunt tanks, or it'd lay in wait and ambush them.
The M10 was effective against German tanks on the flank. It could knock out a Panther from the front, but it could get it from the side. And it turned out to be a pretty effective vehicle.
The Germans also had tank destroyers, because tank destroyers were cheaper to produce than tanks. They often didn't have the armor protection.
The Germans, faced with a growing need for powerful defensive equipment which could counteract Allied numerical superiority, had developed larger, less maneuverable, but heavily armed tanks and self-propelled guns.
It had extremely heavy armor, and the gun was mounted in a turret that did not rotate. Extremely effective weapon. And they also used them as assault vehicles. But that was the development
of the anti-tank gun as far as the Germans are concerned.
At Camp Hood, Texas, a school was established to train new teams of tank destroyers. The soldiers learned all aspects of tank destroyer operation, from vehicle maintenance to gunnery.
That was a tank destroyer camp at that time. We went through our regular basic trainings and what we had to do being in the military, but then we started getting advanced training. Then later on, these engineers were coming down with these tanks from Michigan. We got the M10, and I had no idea how powerful they were.
When the 801st Tank Destroyer Battalion completed its training, it remained at Camp Hood to teach incoming students.
We taught the new guys, and we had to teach them what we learned in our advanced training.
In 1944, the 801st joined the Allied armies in the invasion of Europe.
We were attached to the 4th Infantry Division at the time, which spearheaded at Normandy. We landed at the same beach. It wasn't no picnic landing at Utah Beach even 6 days later, because they already knew where we were coming in at, and they had their guns pretty well trained. We were just lucky to get through there. Then we went south from there, southern part of the Cherbourg Peninsula, which is still in Normandy, and that's where we encountered our first tank battles with the Germans. There was plenty of SS Panzers there, believe me, in that area. We broke through there, and there was opposition here and there, but it was pretty good sailing till we got to Paris. When we came in there, the people just were wild. They were all over the streets, all over the tanks, all the vehicles, and the gals are all kissing the guys, and there was a little champagne and wine flowing around, and I wouldn't have cared. We could stay there a month, but we had to move out in 2 days. And we went over the Ruhr River. We got to Immenroth, Germany, when our battalion finally got M18 destroyers.
The M18 Hellcat was the first tracked tank destroyer specifically designed to hunt and kill enemy armor. With a top speed of 50 miles per hour, the M18 was the fastest armored fighting vehicle of the war.
Everybody was kind of happy about that. It was a more powerful gun, and I think they had the good armor-piercing shells. They could set it into place a lot faster.
Its maneuverability made it well suited to the hit-and-run tactics of tank killing. For Sergeant John Molnar, combat was just a matter of getting a job done.
You change after you're in battle. You just change your whole attitude, because you either killed or be killed. You have to put it out of your mind and hope that damn thing's going to end one of these days.
The array of tank-killing weapons that the armies of World War II developed finally gave the foot soldier a way to defeat an armored enemy. At the end of the war, a new weapon had entered Army service. It wasn't originally designed to fight tanks, but in a few years, this awesome machine, the helicopter, would become a tank crew's most feared rival. Igor Sikorsky's experiments with vertical flight paid off in the winter of 1939 with the success of his VS-300. No other aircraft could fly with the freedom of his helicopter. In 1942, the U.S. Army Air Corps bought an improved version of the VS-300, the XR-4, and began exploring its potential.
Here rides one of the greater achievements in the limitless science of aviation. It's the helicopter, forerunner of new and better things to come in aircraft. The extent of its uses is boundless. Perhaps you can suggest a few more. Shoot 'em in. We'll have the helicopter pick 'em up.
Less than 10 years after testing the R-4, powerful helicopters were operating in the combat zones of the Korean War. The machines proved quite capable at hauling troops and their supplies. For wounded soldiers, the helicopter meant a life-saving trip to a field hospital. With confidence in the rugged, maneuverable aircraft, the Army suggested adding offensive weapons to their helicopters. Designers bolted a variety of weapons to the Bell H-13. Pods firing high-explosive rockets were slung on the larger Sikorsky H-19. And even the Flying Banana, the Piasecki H-21. From these successful tests at the Aviation Center at Fort Rucker, Alabama, grew a new weapon that would soon become synonymous with Army combat operations. By 1965, the Army formulated a radically new doctrine for warfare, air mobility, based on the coordinated use of transport helicopters, air ambulances, and gunships. Air mobility made the helicopter the centerpiece of the Army's struggle in Southeast Asia.
If the helicopter was born in the Korean War, then it certainly came of age in Vietnam. Vietnam was a helicopter war. Whether it was US Army, US Navy, US Marine Corps, US Air Force, all the forces used helicopters. Initially, the helicopter was used in a support role, carrying men and materiel to mountain outposts and small clearings in the jungle. Later during the conflict, they were adapted to carry weapon systems, guns, cannons, rockets and missiles, to give fire support to the troops on the ground, and also to protect the troop-carrying helicopters.
The workhorse of the war, the UH-1 Huey, was armed with just about every weapon that a helicopter could carry. High-explosive and anti-personnel rockets turned the Huey into a flying artillery battery. However, the rockets were unguided, and often many had to be fired to be certain the target was hit. The Army looked for a more capable helicopter to meet the demands of combat.
Eventually, before the end of the war, the US Army had ordered into production the Bell Cobra, the world's first dedicated attack helicopter. Its two-man crew were protected by armor, it was fairly agile, and it had the speed to be able to negotiate and get out of difficult firefight situations.
The most recognizable feature of the Bell Cobra is its thin fuselage, only 3 feet wide. The Cobra presents an enemy anti-aircraft gunner with a very small target. Although armed with a variety of weapons, its most lethal is the TOW missile. The TOW, short for tube-launched, optically tracked, wire-guided, carries the deadly shaped charge. But the missile's most unique feature is its guidance system.
The idea was to get instructions from the operator to the missile to tell it which way to turn to stay on course. The wire originated at the launch platform and came off a reel that flew with the missile to the target. With the wire, you had a covert, closed communication line that couldn't be jammed, couldn't be heard by an enemy. TOW became a very effective, fairly short-range anti-tank weapon.
In the last days of the Vietnam War, TOW missiles, fired from attack helicopters, demonstrated their accuracy and lethality against the Soviet-built tanks of the North Vietnamese Army. These veteran tank busters fought again during the Persian Gulf War. Modernized with more powerful TOWs, Marine Corps Super Cobras played a key role in winning the battle for the town of Kafji. Today's most formidable tank-killing helicopter is the U.S. Army's McDonnell Douglas AH-64 Apache.
Your laser is armed, sir. Okay, come down. Okay, I got target right there. Roger. Let me go on. Good Hellfire launch. Your instrument. It's a new target. You got somebody on the ground. We just got a queue for handoff. Let's see if I can get him to come back. Okay, I think we're that. And team 2 will be covering egress to Toronto. There's fire. They're gone, sir.
The Apache is basically the world's leading state-of-the-art attack helicopter. It's capable of carrying up to 16 Hellfire guided missiles with a range of 8 kilometers. It can operate in most weather conditions, most ground conditions.
The Hellfire missile follows a laser beam that is focused on the target, making pinpoint accuracy possible. Its 17-pound shaped charged warhead can destroy the armor of any tank in the world. Darkness does not ground the Apache. Even on the blackest of nights, special night vision sensors allow the pilot and gunner to fly, hunt, and attack enemy armor. Infrared detectors locate even camouflage targets in the most rugged countryside. The Apache's 30mm chain gun automatic cannon shoots 625 rounds a minute. The ammunition combines the destructive force of high explosive and the armor-penetrating ability of a miniature-shaped charge.
The modern helicopter are flying black boxes full of defense suppression equipment, electronic warfare equipment. They're armor-plated. They have their systems duplicated and sometimes triplicated in order to survive being hit. During Desert Storm, although it had initial teething problems with sand in its engines, it was highly successful in detecting and destroying Iraqi armor, Iraqi troop concentrations, and radar and other special facilities.
Everything. Okay, I have a tank for you. Ready? I wasn't told to. One for got it. Give me another one. We'll get you. There's about 3 kilometers inside of the 4 times. Victor 44, November 44. Roger. I will know you. John, you have it? You want it? And run your that intermedial now. Good, yes.
This new tank killer quickly proved its value in the modern battlefield.
Primary mission out here is to kill tanks. AH-64 is designed to kill tanks and it does its job very well. I had the experience of shooting a Hellfire missile since I've been here, and it's a very outstanding weapon. What this system will allow us to do is to fly at 100 feet, 120 knots, at night, lights out, cross flight, and kill tanks at pinpoint accuracy. You can't argue that with anyone else, that this is not the most sophisticated attack helicopter in the world.
For the infantryman in need of an anti-tank weapon, the bazooka remained unchanged for nearly 20 years until the law, or light anti-armor weapon, entered Army service in 1962. The law fires an armor-piercing rocket sealed within its telescoping tube. Once fired, the empty launcher is discarded. The law's shaped charge warhead can penetrate nearly 11 inches of armor. In Vietnam, the communist guerrillas would salvage the spent tubes and rig them for booby traps.
The Vietnamese would come along and drill a hole in it here, and then take a hand grenade and take the pin out and drop them in here so that the spoon didn't fly off. And they would pack that full of hand grenades and then hang that up in a tree and rig a tripwire to it, and as you would come along and trip the tripwire, all the grenades would fall out and on top of you and could ruin your day.
The infantryman's most effective weapon against tanks is a portable version of the same TOW missile fired from attack helicopters. Today, the TOWs enter combat mounted on Humvees, but are still guided downrange by a gunner.
Once you fire the missile, if you turn the traversing unit, it's going to send a message from the traversing unit to the main brain, the computer, back down through the wire, and it'll actually steer the missile on the target in case you've got a moving target.
New thermal sights improve the TOW's accuracy when fired after dark.
At night, it'll pick up heat signatures. Like you see a vehicle, what you'll basically see is you'll see mainly the engine, and you can see the outline of the vehicle because it picks up the heat from so far away. Basically, it's a one-shot, one-kill. It's almost a guaranteed kill.
For sending TOWs into the heat of battle, the Army pioneered the improved TOW vehicle, an M113 armored personnel carrier modified to carry a twin missile launcher. The ITV protects the crew of 4 from enemy attack.
When you're getting artillery, you can continue to shoot out of an ITV because it's armored, and that's a big plus.
Although the ITV is itself a new system, it is not hampered by the bugs usually found in unproven designs.
The 113 has been around for so long. Mechanics know how to fix it. The parts are on hand. These things have been broken down and fixed by so many generations of soldiers that we know how to make it run. We know how to tweak it to make it run.
Shielding the crew from hostile fire increases the likelihood that the missile will stay on course.
In the first evolution of the TOW on a 113, the gunner was exposed, so if he was getting shot at or getting hit with artillery, he wasn't so confident sitting there for 15 seconds tracking the target. What the ITV does is it gives him protection. He's totally enclosed, so he's going to be impervious to most small arms and everything but a direct hit with artillery. So it gives him a lot more confidence to stay tracking a tank or any target for the full duration of the flight time.
In the hands of the infantry, the most aggressive tank destroyer on the battlefield is the M2 Bradley Infantry Fighting Vehicle. Developed in the late 1970s, the Bradley's speed and armor protection boost its survivability in combat. The M2 has 2 tank-killing weapons systems. The 25mm Bushmaster automatic cannon is effective against thinly skinned vehicles like personnel carriers. The gun fires armor-piercing rounds, much like the penetrator rods fired by the Abrams main battle tank. When engaging heavy armor, the Bradley attacks with its twin TOW missile launcher. With their large warheads and range of 3,500 meters, these guided weapons can defeat any known enemy armor. As an offensive vehicle, the Bradley doesn't hesitate to take the fight to the enemy. In the early 1970s, the NATO armored forces found themselves greatly outnumbered by the Warsaw Pact. In the event of a Soviet invasion of Europe, Western forces would be overrun by waves of Soviet tanks.
The perception of NATO was that at some point in time in the future, the Warsaw Pact may well attack us. For that reason, we invested heavily, not only in tanks, but in the anti-tank systems, particularly attack aircraft.
The A-10 was designed with survivability in mind for the aircraft and the pilot. Many of the critical control systems are duplicated, even triplicated. The engines are set far apart. In the event one is destroyed, the other won't catch fire. The pilot flies from a cockpit lined with titanium armor that can protect him from anti-aircraft fire. The Warthog was built around its main tank-destroying weapon, the 30-millimeter rotary cannon, most powerful ever fitted to an aircraft. It fires projectiles with depleted uranium slugs. Depleted uranium, which is not radioactive, is denser than steel or lead and has a better chance of punching through tank armor.
The A-10 pilots have a counterculture feeling about the airplane. It's looked down upon perhaps by other fighter pilots because it's not as fast. And although it had an official name of Thunderbolt II, it's called the Warthog by the pilots because it's not aesthetically as pleasing an airplane. But in combat, it turned out to be extraordinarily effective, and the Gulf War gave it a new lease on life.
Squadrons of A-10s deployed to the Persian Gulf on the eve of Operation Desert Storm and prepared to face the divisions of Iraqi armor. An A-10, piloted by Colonel Bob Efferson, took a hit from Iraqi anti-aircraft artillery.
I was going through about 11,000 feet when the airplane was hit. It was a very violent jarring of the airplane. My immediate reaction was to get out of the target area. And the airplane kept flying. And so then all we had to do was land a shot-off airplane. Everything went well until I touched down and the left tire blew and the airplane skidded off in the desert, only doing about 50 knots.
The redundant systems brought home a plane and saved a life.
As soon as I was hit, the right system went to zero and all the lights in the world came on. Missile went off and I thought it was a SAM going by, so I started kicking flares out the back. The right side of the airplane took the most hits. There were 378 holes, total holes in the airplane. I had some unexpended ordnance on the wings, and the ordnance had another 45 or 50 holes in it. I wish I'd have kept it on the runway for you, but the tire blew and I just couldn't keep it on there. We got plenty of time. Well, we do now.
The right engine had 45 holes in the shroud. The left engine had about 15. They both kept running. The airplane was so badly damaged that I just didn't see how it could have made it, but she held together and was able to get it home.
Tank busters of the future could soon include lasers, directed energy weapons, and battlefield robots. Tank builders will counter with heavier and more elaborate armor and protective systems that will make their tanks more survivable. But survivability should not be confused with immortality. With so many weapons aimed at knocking out armor, no tank is or ever will be invincible.